Hi everyone, and welcome to the webinar on Help, I'm Graduating, What Next? My name's Gemma and I'm one of the careers consultants that works in the Careers and Enterprise team at Queen Mary. So I'll be with you for the next 30 minutes talking about Help, I'm Graduating, What Next? But just before I start, I just wanted to remind you this is the first webinar in the series of 4 that we're doing for Queen Mary graduates over August. And there's also going to be a LinkedIn screencast available for you all to help with that. But I'll give you more details of that towards the end. So hopefully you can all hear me. I'm going to be inviting you to contribute to the webinar throughout by typing questions into the chat box, which is just down the bottom of the screen. So hopefully you can see that, but there's an image on the slide as well. So you can use the chat box to ask questions. You can use the chat box to answer some of the questions that I'm going to ask you guys as well. And if you have got any problems, you can also raise your hand. So if you've got any issues or any problems or the sound drops out or something, then please raise your hands and we'll try and sort that out too. But if you can't hear me now, do you mind just typing something into the chat box to let me know so that we can try and sort out what's happening? So I'll just give you a few moments in case you can't hear me to type into the chat box. Okay, so hopefully you can all hear me. So to start the webinar, I thought we'd start with a poll because I imagine there might be 2 main groups of people on this webinar. Those that are thinking they want to go into work now that you've graduated, and those that might want to go on to further study. So I'd really like to hear where you are in your decision making process and which one of those groups you might sit in. So it would be great if you could take part in the poll that's just appeared on your screen. The poll's anonymous, so please feel free to be as honest as you want. Nobody else can see. We'll just get a tally at the end of how many people are sitting in each category. So I'll just give you a couple of moments to complete that. Okay, so it looks like one person's completed it so far. Oh no. Okay, brilliant. So thank you for doing that. So we're just going to broadcast the results of that. Okay, so it looks like so most of you are in the situation where you're not really sure what job you want to do, and one of you is thinking perhaps about going on to further study, but perhaps wants a little bit of help applying. So today we're going to cover some of the differences between graduate schemes, graduate jobs, and then we'll come on a bit to further study at the end as well. So just to give you a bit of an overview, by the end of the 30 minutes, you should be able to explain the difference between a graduate scheme and a graduate level job. Should be able to identify ways for you to evaluate whether further study is the right choice for you, and list a couple of job tactics if you perhaps have got a 2-2 and you're a bit worried about securing a graduate job. So that's what we're going to cover over the course of today. Anyone have any questions at this stage? Okay, great. So let's move on. So what's the difference between a graduate scheme and a graduate level job? So does anybody want to share in the chat box some of the differences maybe between the two, or what they think a graduate scheme is or a graduate level job? So if anyone's feeling brave and wants to share in the chat box, that'd be brilliant. Okay, it looks like a couple of you are typing, so I'm just going to give you a few minutes to see what you think of. Because seeing students in one-to-one appointments and things like that, I think there's sometimes a little bit of confusion about what the difference is between a graduate scheme and a graduate level job, and they're not sure always which one might be the right one for them, or sometimes make assumptions that everybody that graduates joins a graduate scheme. So great. So thanks to Elitsa. So maybe the graduate scheme is for a specific time period, while the graduate level job is more long term. So yeah, typically I'd say, yeah, that's right. It tends to be that graduate schemes might be for a fixed space of time. It might be 1 year, 2 years, possibly even slightly longer. Whereas graduate level jobs often tend to be, kind of could be a permanent role. Some graduate schemes, the graduates get hired afterwards, but it's worth checking the particular details of the scheme that you're looking for if that is the route you're planning to go down. So yeah, thanks a lot, Elitsa. That's really helpful. Anyone else have anything to share on that? Okay. So I'm going to start by going over a little bit what a graduate scheme is. So typically with graduate schemes, you do get lots and lots of applications, and the volume of people applying is perhaps small, is very big compared to the roles available. Graduate level jobs, there might be slightly less people applying to the same job, so perhaps slightly less competitive. But as Elitsa, as you said, graduate schemes tend to be kind of a fixed period of time. They tend to be paid employment, but with training built into the job. You usually join with a group of other graduates, so you're in a sort of cohort with some of your peers that start at the same time as you. You get fast track learning via lots of different training, often get to take on responsibility quite soon. Often they require a 2-1, but that's not always the case, and we'll come on to that a bit later on in the webinar. Some might give you the opportunity to rotate around different departments before deciding where you might want to specialise, so that gives you a really good overview of what the organisation does, but then there's the opportunity to specialise a little bit later on. And they may, depending on the type of role you want to go for, involve completing a professional qualification as well. So the recruitment process for graduate schemes tend to be quite lengthy and involve several steps. Often that might include an online application form, perhaps a telephone interview to screen kind of large numbers of applicants down to a smaller number for the later stages of the recruitment process. And usually that might include an assessment centre and/or a face-to-face interview. And sometimes during the application process, you also get asked to complete some psychometric tests looking at things like your numeracy and your literacy skills, either as part of the online application or actually at the assessment centre itself. So in terms of graduate schemes, quite a lot of these exist in sectors like government, health, business, management, human resources, retail, finance and tech. Fewer tend to exist in the charity or the international development sector, the media and the arts sectors. So if you are thinking that that is the kind of career path that you want to go down, it might be more that you're looking at a sort of graduate level job. So I guess some of the downsides perhaps of a graduate scheme are that there are a lot of applicants for graduate schemes, so it can be quite competitive to get onto them. And the other thing that's worth bearing in mind is they often recruit a year ahead of when you would actually start. So if you were applying in autumn this year, you probably wouldn't start till at least July the following year. So that's worth bearing in mind if you're thinking about the type of job that you want to apply for. Okay, so what's a graduate level job then? What's the difference to a graduate scheme? So graduate level jobs are often roles that are advertised as perhaps suitable for a recent graduate, or it might be that they're advertised as a trainee role. Again, you can get responsibility quite quickly as they might tailor it to your own aptitude, your own skills, rather than you going through a system in the way that you would on a graduate scheme. The main difference is that there's usually only one of you if you apply for a graduate level job rather than a group of you going through the scheme at the same time. So there isn't necessarily the fast track training or the rotation element, although you will probably be given support to get up to speed in your role. You sort of do the job and have to work your way up through the organisation. The other main difference is the timing. So often with a graduate level job, when they're advertised, that could be any time of the year, and they're usually looking for somebody to start relatively soon. So if you are thinking about going to work and you want something sooner rather than later, it might be a graduate level job that you want to think about, or at least something that you can be doing if you're applying to a graduate scheme later. Graduate level jobs tend to be more common in small and medium enterprises, so SMEs, which sometimes puts students off that I've seen, or graduates off, because they think that they want to work for larger firms. But it's worth knowing that an SME can employ up to 250 people, so they are relatively decent sized organisations. And large companies do sometimes also offer graduate level roles as well, but they just might be called something different, so it might be a trainee level role. So if you've got your heart set on working for a big company but you don't want to apply for a graduate scheme, then it's worth just scrutinising their jobs pages to see whether they offer those kind of entry level roles as well. Okay, any questions on that? Because that was quite a lot of information in one go. So if anyone has got any questions, I'll just give you a few moments to start typing something in. Okay, let's move on. So I'm going to talk you a little bit through the recruitment process for both of those schemes. So I've got two I guess, flowcharts up on the slide. We've touched on this a little bit already, but if you could type into the box whether you think Path A is a graduate scheme or a graduate level job, or is Part B graduate scheme or graduate level job. If you could type into the box which you think is which, that would be brilliant. Great, I can see a couple of you typing, so it'd be great to know what you think. So Litsa says A is a grad scheme, B is a graduate job. Sami says A is a grad scheme. Yeah, Anna says A is a grad scheme, B is a graduate job. Great. Yep, so you're all right. Yeah, A is the process for the graduate scheme, and B is the graduate level job, so that's great. As you can see, it's just a slightly longer process usually for getting into a graduate scheme. That's, I guess, often because they get a lot of applications that they're trying to then whittle down to the number of people that they can take onto the graduate scheme. Okay, so how do you decide which is going to be the right thing for you, a graduate scheme or a graduate level job? So I guess some things to consider that we've touched on already with the graduate scheme is that if you are planning to apply for a graduate scheme this autumn, you won't start until next year probably. So there will be almost a year for you to fill, and it will be worth thinking about how you can use that time in a meaningful way, and what kind of things that you might want to achieve in that time. That said, it's worth looking out for, sometimes some companies open their graduate schemes in the summer if they still have some vacancies left. So it's worth keeping an eye out for something that might start sooner, but the chances are if you're applying in the autumn, you won't be starting until at least kind of July to September next year. I guess some of the advantages of a graduate scheme are it's structured training. You get to work together in a group of peers. So if you like that kind of cohort style of working or training, that might be quite appealing to you. But it's worth being aware that only about 10% of graduates actually get their jobs through graduate schemes. So I guess contrary to some of the things that people that we see might think, actually that's not the majority route that most graduates find their jobs. Okay, so graduate level jobs, some things to think about. If you apply, the chances are you can probably start relatively soon once you've been through the recruitment process. So that's quite good if you're looking for something to start sooner rather than later. But you probably won't get the same structured training or rotations as you would with a graduate scheme. And it's also worth, I suppose, thinking about which kind of sector that you want to get into and whether there are graduate schemes for that type of role. Because as I mentioned earlier, there are some sectors where they are less common, and there are some types of organisations, the smaller organisations, where it's unlikely that they'll offer a graduate scheme. So that's worth considering as well. Okay, any questions so far? Great. So this slide just gives you a few ideas on where you can find graduate vacancies, whether you're looking at graduate level jobs or graduate schemes. It's worth noting that if you are thinking about a graduate scheme, the Target Jobs website has some really, really helpful information generally about graduate schemes and what they are and the kind of application process. If you want more ideas or information on how to find jobs, including perhaps jobs in a particular sector, if you do have a rough idea about the area you want to go into, then our next webinar on Monday, on the 6th of August, is looking at strategic job hunting. And that's going to cover things like job websites, networking. It's going to touch on LinkedIn and the kind of hidden job market. So those are jobs that aren't necessarily advertised on a regular jobs board, but are really interesting jobs for graduates. So all of the details of the webinars are on our graduates website at www.careers.qmul.ac.uk/graduates, but I'll put that link up at the end of the webinar as well. And the other thing to note that with the Queen Mary jobs board, so that's the careers.qmul.ac.uk/jobs, you will need to register as an alumnus to view everything on our Target Connect system, and that will apply for if you want to book appointments and come to any events next year as well. Okay, so I know at the beginning of the webinar, quite a few of you mentioned that you weren't quite sure what you want to do yet, and it might be that you have a few ideas, it might be that you don't have any ideas at all at that stage, and that's fine because there is a lot of support out there to help you. So one of the things you might want to start by doing is researching your options, and a good place to start to do that is the Prospects website. So I've put the website up there, prospects.ac.uk. So they have a really handy kind of career quiz that you can fill in, and that might throw back some job ideas that you haven't thought of before. They've also got about 400 different graduate job profiles. And what I mean by that is they're not necessarily vacancies, but they give you an overview of different jobs. So they tell you what the responsibilities for the role are. They tell you what the working conditions are like. So what's the typical salary? Is it in an office or somewhere else? What are the typical working hours for that job? What are the entry requirements? How do you get into that particular job? And they also have links to other places that you can look. And they also have, if you think, oh, I quite want to use my degree in my job, they have sections on what you can do with different degrees. So what you can do with a history degree or a geography degree that might relate closely to what you study. So that's a really good place to start your research. Another thing that you might want to do, and it can be really helpful sometimes, to just talk through with somebody else how you're feeling and what kind of ideas that you have. So you can always book a careers appointment with one of the careers consultants at Queen Mary. So the number's on the slide. You can call us up, and we offer appointments by Skype and by phone. So if you're not able to come into Queen Mary to have a face-to-face appointment, we do offer other options. But it can just be helpful, as I said, to talk through some of your ideas, get a bit of inspiration around what your next steps might be. Rather than just fret about it on your own, there is support and you can talk to somebody about that. And another good tactic is just to try something out. So just getting some experience, it's, I guess, more experience to boost your CV, but also just a really good way to test out what kind of things you like doing in a work environment. So there are places that offer internships. So Graduate Talent Pool is, as the name might suggest, it's internships for graduates. We've also got our own temping agency through the Queen Mary Careers and Enterprise Centre. And often those places could be for up to 6 months. So it can give you a meaty chunk of experience and a good way to test out what it is that you do and don't like doing. And we have actually got a graduate working in our team now that started on a temping agency role, and when a job came up that was a permanent role, she applied for it and was selected. So sometimes those temping roles could lead potentially to permanent roles as well. So that might be another tactic that's worth trying. Okay, so just to recap, I guess in terms of next steps, thinking about trying to decide on what type of job it is that you want. And as I said, there's support available through us if you are struggling with that. Decide on whether you want to apply for a graduate level job or a graduate scheme or a bit of both. Go to relevant job websites to find vacancies and then start making applications. And if you are making applications and you want any feedback on your CV, your cover letter, your application form, again, you're very welcome to make an appointment and we can look at that with you and give you some feedback. Okay, any questions before we move on to the further study section? Just give you a couple of moments to type if you have got any questions. Okay, right, so next we're going to talk a little bit about further study. So further study is quite an investment of time and money. So it's really good to have a clear idea about your reasons for doing it before you embark on further study. So does anyone want to type into the chat box some reasons that might be a good reason to undertake a master's degree? I'll just give you a moment in case anyone wants to type in some of the reasons they might be considering for doing a master's degree. So it looks like a couple of people are typing, which is great. Yeah, great. So Yvonne says, gain more skills, narrow career path, and expand your network. Yeah, so I think all really good reasons for kind of going on to further study, going on to do a master's, particularly if I guess you've got a particular career in mind and you know that you're going to gain the skills that are going to make you more competitive in that market. It might give you some clearer ideas about which area you want to specialize in, as you say, and it's a good way of expanding your network, and that might be through the people you meet on your course, but it also might be a opportunity to meet people from the sector that you want to go into or get some experience in that sector. So yeah, all great reasons. I guess thinking about whether a master's will have an advantage for you in the job market, yes, but not necessarily for all jobs. So many employers, so for example in areas like business, banking and finance, technology, might say that they're looking for an undergraduate and will train you on the job. But for other jobs, it might be that a master's is a requirement to apply, and for others, it just might be an advantage to have one, or you might meet a particular point in your career where you can't go much further without getting that master's. So I guess areas where that might be applied could be things like sustainable development, energy and the environment, museums and heritage, and other areas all benefit from the additional knowledge gained through a master's. So because they're quite competitive sectors to get into, a master's might give you an advantage in terms of helping you stand out. So how do you know whether for the job that you're interested in, it would be an advantage to have a master's? It's worth looking again at the Prospects website that I mentioned earlier. So I'll put the website up again. So that's got a really good section on postgraduate study, and you can look at the job profiles on there as well to see if a master's would help you in terms of your chosen career path. It's also worth noting that postgraduates are more likely to be in high skilled employment, so in professional or managerial roles. So last year, 77% of all working age postgraduates were in high skilled employment compared to 65% of all working age graduates. So can have job advantages, other good reasons. Some people do it because they're just really interested in that area. So if that's you and you can afford to do a master's, then that can be a good reason for doing it. again, as you said, Yvonne, it might be that you want to narrow your career path or start to specialise in a particular area or even move into a new area. So a master's could help with that. And it may also be a good way to make industry contacts and connections. But in terms of perhaps not so good reasons, so sometimes we see people who decide to do a master's because they don't know what else to do and are almost putting off that decision by going on to further study. So if that's you, then it might be worth trying to challenge yourself on whether that is the best idea, just because it is an investment of time and money. Sometimes you can end up in the same place 1 year later and you still don't know what you want to do next. So I guess if you are deciding to study because you're not sure what else to do, it's worth having a plan to make sure that in a year's time you do know where you want to be next. And if you want to chat anything through with somebody else, again, as I said, you can book an appointment with a careers consultant who can help you to sort of evaluate and weigh up what your job options could be and how best to explore those over the next year, and whether doing further study or going into work is the right thing for you at this time. So, in summary, if you're evaluating whether to go into further study, just take stock of your reasons. We've gone over today some of the areas where there's added value in doing a master's, either personally or for your own career. So if you decide it is for you, then we're going to look at some more information on how to apply. So there's the number again for booking a careers appointment. But thinking about applying to further study, so as I mentioned before, Prospects have really got a really good postgraduate study section, and there's information on there, things like, is a master's right for me? There's good advice on there about writing personal statements, about going to interview, that kind of thing, and just some of the practicalities of applying. Applications are often via the university website. Some courses may even have a few places left for this year still, but most will be full. If that is the case, you can always call up and ask. Looks like Anna's raised her hand. Anna, do you want to type into the chat box? If you've got a concern, do you want to type into the chat box because I can't hear you guys on the webinar? So yeah, as I said, if you are thinking about applying for this year and you're not sure whether the course is still open or taking applications, it's always worth giving them a call and asking, particularly if you've got other questions that you want to ask about the course as well. And if you are thinking about applying, it's always worth doing your research in depth about both the course and the institution before you apply. So Anna's typed yes. Yes, so that's a really good question. So an MSc, I guess, is a sort of standalone taught masters. An MSci is a master's that you get as part of your undergraduate program. So Anna, that's a really good question because they are essentially, you end up with a qualification at the same sort of level. So in effect, they are sort of the level that you end up is equivalent of the two. So if you're applying for kind of science roles and things like that, there probably won't be that much difference between the two. But if you want to have a chat with a careers consultant in a bit more detail about the kind of things that you're planning to go into, then you might want to book a careers appointment. But essentially, if you've got an MSci, you will be finishing with the same sort of level of qualification as an MSc. And I guess in the past, some people might have decided that an MSci might be better because you could get a loan for an undergraduate degree, but you can also get loans for postgraduate degrees now as well. So it's worth, again, checking out the prospects section or the findermasters.com sections on funding and loans and things like that if you're worried about financing a master's. But do come back in a one-to-one if you want to talk more about for the particular career or jobs that you're thinking about, then we can cover that there. So as I was saying, it's worth doing your research in depth about both the course and the institution before you apply. as these are the kind of things that will come in useful when you're preparing your application. So the university will often want to see evidence in your personal statement that you've thought about why you're applying to their particular program at that particular institution. But also it's just really helpful for you when you're trying to make a decision about whether that's the right course for you or not. So what I would suggest is scrutinizing all the details on the institution's website. You might want to talk to people that are on the course or who've graduated from the program. And it's often worth speaking to the admissions tutor to ask any questions you might have about the course. So that might be what other graduates from the program have gone on to do afterwards, particularly if you've got a specific career in mind. Okay. Any other questions on further study? So Anna, I hope that answered your question. If anyone else has got any other questions, please do type them into the box. Okay. So I guess in terms of next steps, if you are considering further study, first step would be to decide whether it's the right thing for you. If it is, then start to research courses and universities that offer the type of thing that you would like to study. Look at the application process on the university website, and each process might give you slightly different advice, or sometimes they tell you exactly what they want in your personal statement. Sometimes they're a little bit more vague, but make sure you check all the details that are available, and then you're ready to start making applications. And in the same way that I said we could give you feedback on your CVs and your cover letters, we can also help you with your personal statements as well. Okay, so moving on. So just in case any of you, so I guess we often see students at this time of year that are worried about their job prospects because they got a 2-2. And if that's you, then hopefully the next couple of minutes will raise your spirits and show you that there are still a lot of opportunities available to you in the graduate job market. So just thinking about some of the tactics you might employ in your job search if you have a 2-2. I guess one of the things is, if you're thinking about applying for a graduate scheme, check the grade requirements, because not all of them do require a 2-1. The Target Jobs website, and the links up there on the slide, has a really good list of graduate schemes in different sectors that are open to people with a 2-2. So some of those include some of the big 4 accounting firms like Deloitte, Ernst & Young, KPMG, PwC, also places like Apple, Boots, Google, the HMRC, John Lewis, Jaguar Land Rover, Met Police, Sky, Stagecoach. So all of those have graduate schemes available that you can apply to with a 2-2. And it's also worth noting that some of the large graduate recruiters accept 2-2s for some graduate schemes but not others. So if there is a particular company that you're really interested in, it's worth looking at the different graduate schemes that they offer, because it might be that you're eligible for some and not others. But if you're really interested in that company, then it's worth checking their website for that and doing your research there. Similarly, if you've got your heart set on a big company, you could also keep an eye out for those trainee or entry-level roles that are the graduate level roles that we talked about earlier in the session as well. If you decide that you want to apply for a graduate level job, often they don't specify the degree grade that they're looking for. So sometimes they might state the degree discipline if it's applicable to the role, but quite often they won't necessarily ask for a 2-1 or above. They don't often state the grade requirement. Also, I guess graduate level jobs may be much less oversubscribed than places on graduate schemes run by the bigger employers. So they can be really great opportunities for getting a job and getting early responsibility and starting to develop your career. So you could apply to work in an SME, or, as I said, keep your eyes on the larger employers' careers websites for those direct entry roles. Thirdly, your networks can be a huge help in your job search, whatever your degree classification. So 20% of 2017 graduates found that full or part-time work, that their full or part-time work came through their personal contacts. So that's about 1/5 of everybody that graduated found their job through their personal contacts. So if you know somebody in a company, or you can get introduced to somebody in a company, or you can perhaps find somebody on LinkedIn, and as I said, there'll be a LinkedIn screencast later in August, then it really helps to get your CV application more attention, because you've almost got somebody that can kind of help vouch for you when you're going through the application process. And that might make it a bit easier to get through to the interview stage. So as I said, keep an eye out for the LinkedIn webcast, but also you might want to sign up for the webinar on Monday on strategic job hunting. If you do have a 2-2 and the job says that it requires a 2-1, one of the things you could try is just ringing up and asking. So ring up, speak to somebody from the organisation and just check whether it is still worth applying for that role, especially if you meet most of the other criteria, because some employers might be impressed by your proactivity and the fact that you've taken the initiative to call them. Similarly, if you've got genuine extenuating or mitigating circumstances, so perhaps you've been really ill or you've suffered a bereavement, then it's worth getting in touch with the recruiters early on to let them know. Okay, a few other tips on, I guess, job searching. Be open-minded to varied opportunities. So if you have got a 2-2, the more flexible you are, the more options that you will have open to you. And do a really good job on your marketing yourself on your application document. So that will be making sure that you emphasize the skills that they're looking for in your cover letter or CV or application form, and the value of any work experience that you already have, or any extracurricular activities or positions of responsibility or volunteering that you've done. Just make sure you write a really good, really tailored application. And we've got webinars coming up later in the series about how to present yourself on paper in a CV or a cover letter. So that takes place on the 13th of August. That's worth signing up for as well. Sorry, it's on the 21st of August as per the slide. Okay. So has anyone got any questions on any of that section, or indeed on anything else that we've covered in the webinar so far? So that's the end of the sort of the formal slide part of the webinar. So if you have got any questions, now is your opportunity to answer them. And we've got about 7 or 8 minutes left for questions. So please do type them into the chat box if you have got anything that you want to raise, or anything that we haven't covered that you are hoping we'd talk about today. Otherwise, I've got a couple of questions for you. So it'd be really interesting to know if anyone's happy to type in whether the webinars made you feel any differently, perhaps about graduate schemes versus graduate jobs, or about going on to further study, or if anyone's willing to share their next steps in terms of what they might do after the webinar. That would be really great to hear as well. So any questions, any feelings that you have after listening to the webinar, or any ideas about what next steps you might take, I'd love to hear. Great, so it looks like Anna's typing. And there's a couple of you typing, which is great. Really love to hear, what your thoughts are, how you're feeling now, or any questions that you have that I can help with today. Okay, great. So Anna's going to have a look at some of the websites that we've talked about today. So that's brilliant. Thanks, Anna. Jenny, so she's thinking about doing an MSc in economics, but doesn't have a foundation in it. Is there any way to meet the requirements, or do they? Yeah, so that's a really great question, Jenny. What I might recommend is actually perhaps making a one-to-one appointment to talk about that with a careers consultant, because I guess without knowing a little bit more about sort of what you have studied already, or what other things you might have done outside of your degree, that's quite a difficult question to answer. But so it'd be good to chat through a little bit more what your particular circumstances are, and I guess what you're thinking of doing with your MSc in economics. So I'd really recommend you making a careers appointment, and you can do that over the phone or by Skype if that's easier than coming onto campus. Okay, brilliant, thanks Jenny. Yeah, we'll hopefully see you in an appointment or talk to you in an appointment soon. Okay. Well, thank you very much for joining us. I'm going to stay on the webinar for a few more minutes, so if anyone has got any questions, then please do feel free to type them into the box. I'm also just going to put up the link for our graduates careers page, the careers and enterprise page for Queen Mary graduates. So I'll just stick that up on the screen now. So this page has got details of all of the webinars that I mentioned that are coming up. So as I said, we've got the strategic approach to job hunting next Monday. Then we've got presenting yourself on paper on CVs and cover letters. And we've got one on impressing at interviews. So there'll all be webinars, and then we'll also have a screencast as well to give you a few more tips on LinkedIn, which is a brilliant way sometimes for doing your research about what different jobs. So if you're still at the stage where you're not sure what you want to do, you could look up Queen Mary and see what other alumni from your school have done afterwards. That might give you some more ideas and inspiration, but also great for kind of expanding your professional network, finding contacts in organisations that you might be interested in working for, finding people that are doing jobs that you want to do, that you could maybe get in touch with them to ask them a few questions about their role. So I'm going to stay on the webinar for a few more minutes, so if anyone has got any questions, then please do type them in, or if anyone else wants to share next steps or how they're feeling, that would be great. Otherwise, I just want to say thank you very much to all of you for joining me today, and I hope it's been useful. So thank you.